The third group had a pile-up halfway around the pitch. Most of the fourth group had come without broomsticks. The fifth group were Hufflepuffs. "If there's anyone else here who's not from Gryffindor," roared Harry, who was starting to get seriously annoyed, "leave now, please." There was a pause, then a couple of little Ravenclaws went sprinting off the pitch, snorting with laughter. After 2 hours, many complaints, and several tantrums, one involving a crashed Comet 260 and several broken teeth, Harry had found himself 3 chasers. Katie Bell returned to the team after an excellent trial, a new find called Dimazar Robbins, who was particularly good at dodging bludgers, and Ginny Weasley, who had outflown all the competition and scored 17 goals to boot. Pleased though he was with his choices, Harry had also shouted himself hoarse at the many complainers and was now enduring a similar battle with the rejected beaters. "That's my final decision, and if you don't get out of the way of the keepers, I'll hex you," he bellowed. Neither of his chosen beaters had the old brilliance of Fred and George, but he was still reasonably pleased with them. Jimmy Peaks, a short but broad-chested third-year boy who had managed to raise a lump the size of an egg on the back of Harry's head with a ferociously hit bludger, and Richie Goot, who looked weedy but aimed well. They now joined Katie, Dimazar, and Ginny in the stands to watch the selection of their last team member. Harry had deliberately left the trial of the keepers until last, hoping for an emptier stadium and less pressure on all concerned. Unfortunately, however, all the rejected players and a number of people who had come down to watch after a lengthy breakfast had joined the crowd by now, so that it was larger than ever. As each keeper flew up to the goal hoops, the crowd roared and jeered in equal measure. Harry glanced over at Ron, who had always had a problem with nerves. Harry had hoped that winning their final match last term might have cured it, but apparently not. Ron was a delicate shade of green. None of the first 5 applicants saved more than 2 goals apiece. To Harry's great disappointment, Cormac McLagan saved 4 penalties out of 5. On the last one, however, he shot off in completely the wrong direction. The crowd laughed and booed, and McLagan returned to the ground grinding his teeth. Ron looked ready to pass out as he mounted his Clenseep 11. "Good luck!" cried a voice from the stands. Harry looked around, expecting to see Hermione, but it was Lavender Brown. He would have quite liked to have hidden his face in his hands, as she did a moment later, but thought that as the captain he ought to show slightly more grit, and so turned to watch Ron do his trial. Yet he need not have worried. Ron saved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 penalties in a row. Delighted, and resisting joining in the cheers of the crowd. With difficulty, Harry turned to McLagan to tell him that, most unfortunately, Ron had beaten him, only to find McLagan's red face inches from his own. He stepped back hastily. "His sister didn't really try," said McLagan menacingly. There was a vein pulsing in his temple like the one Harry had often admired in Uncle Vernon's. "She gave him an easy save." "Rubbish," said Harry coldly. "That was the one he nearly missed." McLagan took a step nearer Harry, who stood his ground this time. "Give me another go." "No," said Harry. "You've had your go. You saved 4. Ron saved 5. Ron's keeper, he won it fair and square. Get out of my way." He thought for a moment that McLagan might punch him, but he contented himself with an ugly grimace and stormed away, growling what sounded like threats to thin air. Harry turned around to find his new team beaming at him. "Well done," he croaked. "You flew really well." "You did brilliantly, Ron." This time it really was Hermione running toward them from the stands. Harry saw Lavender walking off the pitch, arm in arm with Parvati, a rather grumpy expression on her face. Ron looked extremely pleased with himself, and even taller than usual as he grinned at the team and at Hermione. After fixing the time of their first full practice for the following Thursday, Harry, Ron, and Hermione bade goodbye to the rest of the team and headed off toward Hagrid's. A watery sun was trying to break through the clouds now, and it had stopped drizzling at last. Harry felt extremely hungry. He hoped there would be something to eat at Hagrid's. "I thought I was going to miss that fourth penalty," Ron was saying happily. "Tricky shot from Dimazar, did you see, had a bit of spin on it." Yes, you were magnificent," said Hermione, looking amused. "I was better than that McLaggen anyway," said Ron in a highly satisfied voice. "Did you see him lumbering off in the wrong direction on his fifth? Looked like he'd been confounded." To Harry's surprise, Hermione turned a very deep shade of pink at these words. Ron noticed nothing, he was too busy describing each of his other penalties in loving detail. The great grey hippogriff, Buckbeak, was tethered in front of Hagrid's cabin. He clicked his razor-sharp beak at their approach and turned his huge head toward them. "Oh dear," said Hermione nervously. "He's still a bit scary, isn't he?" "Come off it, you've ridden him, haven't you?" said Ron. Harry stepped forward and bowed low to the hippogriff without breaking eye contact or blinking. After a few seconds, Buckbeak sank into a bow too. "How are you?" Harry asked him in a low voice, moving forward to stroke the feathery head. "Missing him. But you're okay here with Hagrid, aren't you?" "Oi!" said a loud voice. Hagrid had come striding around the corner of his cabin wearing a large, flowery apron and carrying a sack of potatoes. His enormous boarhound, Fang, was at his heels. Fang gave a booming bark and bounded forward. "Get away from him. He'll have your fingers, oh. It's your lot." Fang was jumping up at Hermione and Ron, attempting to lick their ears. Hagrid stood and looked at them all for a split second, then turned and strode into his cabin, slamming the door behind him. "Oh dear," said Hermione, looking stricken. "Don't worry about it," said Harry grimly. He walked over to the door and knocked loudly. "Hagrid, open up, we want to talk to you." There was no sound from within. "If you don't open the door, we'll blast it open," Harry said, pulling out his wand. "Harry," said Hermione, sounding shocked. "You can't possibly." "Yeah, I can," said Harry. "Stand back." But before he could say anything else, the door flew open again as Harry had known it would, and there stood Hagrid, glowering down at him and looking, despite the flowery apron, positively alarming. "I'm a teacher," he roared at Harry. "A teacher, Potter? How dare ya threaten to break down my door?" "I'm sorry, sir, said Harry, emphasizing the last word as he stowed his wand inside his robes. Hagrid looked stunned. Since when have ye called me sir? Since when have you called me Potter? Oh, very clever, growled Hagrid. Very amusin'. That's me outsmarted. In it. All right, come in then, ye ungrateful little. Mumbling darkly, he stood back to let them pass. Hermione scurried in after Harry, looking rather frightened. Well, said Hagrid grumpily, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down around his enormous wooden table, Fang laying his head immediately upon Harry's knee and drooling all over his robes. What's this? Feeling sorry for me? Reckon I'm lonely or summat? No, said Harry at once. We wanted to see you. We've missed you, said Hermione tremulously. Missed me, have ye? Snorted Hagrid. Yeah. Right. He stomped around, brewing up tea in his enormous copper kettle, muttering all the while. Finally he slammed down 3 bucket-sized mugs of mahogany brown tea in front of them and a plate of his rock cakes. Harry was hungry enough even for Hagrid's cooking, and took one at once. Hagrid, said Hermione timidly, when he joined them at the table and started peeling his potatoes with a brutality that suggested that each tuber had done him a great personal wrong. We really wanted to carry on with care of magical creatures, you know. Hagrid gave another great snort. Harry rather thought some bogies landed on the potatoes, and was inwardly thankful that they were not staying for dinner. We did, said Hermione. But none of us could fit it into our schedules. Yeah. Right, said Hagrid again. There was a funny squelching sound and they all looked around. Hermione let out a tiny shriek, and Ron leapt out of his seat and hurried around the table away from the large barrel standing in the corner that they had only just noticed. It was full of what looked like foot-long maggots. Slimy, white, and writhing. What are they, Hagrid? Asked Harry, trying to sound interested rather than revolted, but putting down his rock cake all the same. Just giant grubs, said Hagrid. And they grow into? Said Ron, looking apprehensive. They won't grow into nothing, said Hagrid. I got to feed to Aragog. And without warning, he burst into tears. Hagrid! Cried Hermione, leaping up, hurrying around the table the long way to avoid the barrel of maggots, and putting an arm around his shaking shoulders. What is it? It's him, gulped Hagrid, his beetle black eyes streaming as he mopped his face with his apron. It's Aragog. I think he's dying. He got ill over the summer and he's not getting better. I don't know what I'll do if he. We've been together so long. Hermione patted Hagrid's shoulder, looking at a complete loss for anything to say. Harry knew how she felt. He had known Hagrid to present a vicious baby dragon with a teddy bear, seen him croon over giant scorpions with suckers and stingers, attempt to reason with his brutal giant of a half-brother, but this was perhaps the most incomprehensible of all his monster fancies, the gigantic talking spider, Aragog, who dwelled deep in the Forbidden Forest and which he and Ron had only narrowly escaped for years previously.